Alright guys, part 2 for that reproductive system. This time we're going to talk about the reproductive system in females. So like males, females have a reproductive cells called ovum. These cells are created in one of two almond-sized organs called the ovaries. Each ovary contains thousands of follicles that contain immature eggs, or oocytes, and the oocytes start out as an ovum, and then that's the primary gamete for a woman. Once the egg is ready to be released, that's called ovulation. The egg is picked up by these finger-like projections called fimbriae, and the fimbriae take them into tubes called fallopian tubes, and the tubes travel into your cavity called a uterus. It's worth noting that these fallopian tubes aren't made of like transitional epithelium, like say your bladder, so they don't stretch very well, they can't move much. This is really important and can cause some complications if the egg doesn't make it to the uterus or if it meets a sperm while it's still inside those tubes. The fetus or the zygote will grow and the tubes can't stretch, and this is what's called an ectopic pregnancy. Alright, moving to the uterus. The uterus is this cavity. It's got multiple layers, a very muscular cavity. The outer layer is called your perimetrium, your inner muscle layer is called your myometrium, and that inner lining is called the endometrium. This should sound similar to other organs we've talked about. And the uterus can be divided into three portions. On the top, you've got your fundus. The middle, we've got the body of the uterus, and then at the bottom, in a narrow portion, we've got the cervix. At the end of the cervix, which is the narrowest part and kind of closes off, is a tube, another muscular tube, that leads outside the body called the vagina. Externally, the vagina has a series of glands, folds of tissue called the labia minora and majora, and a layer of adipose tissue on top called the mons pubis. And all of these collectively as a group are called the vulva. Alright, so for the purposes of reproduction, an oocyte will mature in the ovaries, travel down the fallopian tube, hang out in the uterus for a little while, where it potentially meet a sperm cell, and then develop into a zygote and eventually a fetus. This process of maturing an oocyte egg and moving it from the ovaries to the uterus is called menstruation. And it usually happens once every 28 days, though that could be anywhere from 20 to 45 days depending on the woman. So what triggers this whole menstrual cycle? So it starts with low levels of estrogen. That tells the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to start secreting follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormones. That follicle-stimulating hormone is going to cause the follicles in the ovaries to mature the oocyte. As that follicle matures, it's going to start secreting estrogen and then move towards the edge or the walls of the ovaries, where a fimbriae can grab it when it's ready and then bring it to the uterus. This steady increase in estrogen is going to cause that endometrium, or that lining inside the uterus, to start to thicken. So once the egg reaches the sides of the ovaries, there's this huge spike up in estrogen and in luteinizing hormone. This spike is going to cause the follicle that's holding onto that oocyte to rupture, releasing the egg to the fimbriae, which can grab it and bring it into the tubes. This is called ovulation. This is the point where a woman could conceivably become pregnant. The remaining parts of the follicle holding the egg will stay in the ovaries, and it's going to start secreting progesterone as that egg travels down the fallopian tube and sits in the uterus. The progesterone is going to further thicken the uterus, and it's going to start bringing more blood to it, which is great when we're getting ready for pregnancy or a potential pregnancy. These high levels of estrogen and progesterone also stop the already high levels of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from getting another egg ready to be released. So it's kind of like estrogen and progesterone stop the follicle-stimulating hormones. If this process didn't work, it's how we end up with like fraternal twins, where two eggs come down together. If that egg isn't impregnated, the remaining follicle, the thing that was in the ovaries that's releasing all this progesterone, it's called a corpus luteum, is just going to disintegrate. This whole step from the progesterone getting released all the way to that corpus luteum disintegrating is called the luteal phase. So if we've made it to this portion, we enter menstruation. So this would be an egg was released and the corpus luteum disintegrated. So once we start menstruation, our estrogen and progesterone levels are going to just plummet, they're going to drop. And that additional lining in the uterus is just sloughed off and excreted through the vagina. The decrease in estrogen triggers the hypothalamus to release gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, which is going to tell the anterior pituitary gland to start this whole process over again.